I don't know how many of you, I'm kind of a sports junkie, and so even though I'm over here in Europe where most of the sports that I follow aren't really being played, I've been always on ESPN and checking out what's going on back in the States. And there was a story that actually got a little bit of international notoriety recently of a woman named Diane Nyad. Anyone know who that is by name? Here's a picture of her. She's an American and a distance swimmer, and she recently swam from Cuba to Key West. Now that's 177 kilometers. And it actually took her 53 straight hours. So that's like no sleeping. She could tread water. They would hand her like a power bar, or some water to drink. Occasionally she would pull up alongside the boat and no one was allowed to touch her except for a doctor who would take her pulse to make sure she wasn't like on the verge of death. And they would put a little more suntan lotion on her and then just kind of push her back out and say, "Go get up, girl." And she just kept swimming. 177 kilometers, 53 hours, and by the way, she's 64 years old. So I don't know what you're planning on doing at 64, but that wasn't real high on my list. At no point did she receive any assistance. She never used snorkels or fins. She never left the water. She never even touched the boat. In fact, there's a picture here in the lower right, if you Google online. When she comes out, her lips are like 4 times larger than they were when she went in. The salt water has just puckered her entire body from being in the water that long. And people would kayak alongside her and kind of encourage her. But the thing that was so amazing to me is not just that she stayed awake 53 hours to start with. I don't know about you. I've never gone past 36, I think. Stayed awake, stayed active, swam that whole way. Did it at 64 years old, but she had already failed at this attempt 4 other times in life. I mean, like, I've tried to, snowboard twice and failed, and I'll never do it again. This woman swam 3/4 of the way from Cuba to Key West, was about to drown, called for help, got out, and thought, you know what, I'm going to come back here and do that next time. On her 5th attempt, she finally did it. And there's a TED Talk out, actually. You can Google her name, and she gives a great talk about how she first tried it in her 20s. And later in life, she said she was looking for a goal that she could set, that she could strive for. And this turns out to be her goal, that she ended up meeting it. I was just blown away to hear that, amazed that this woman would have that kind of perseverance to swim that distance and do it after she had failed 4 times. Our theme tonight is amazed. And the word amazed occurs often in the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament. But when Jesus comes on the scene, the word amazed shows up all the time. In fact, more than 30 times in the Bible will you find the word amazed. And the word amazed literally means to strike someone enough to move them. Go back that once, Chris. I don't know if you're familiar with Elaine from the U.S. show Seinfeld, but whenever Elaine was amazed at something, she would yell, "Get out!" and smack somebody. And it's actually a pretty good definition of amazed, except that when you're amazed, it's kind of like you're blown away. So Elaine would get amazed and hit somebody else, and so it was always kind of like, don't tell Elaine surprising facts and be too close to her, she'll hit you. But we still use synonyms today like that convey that same idea of the word amazed. We say things like, "I was blown away by that story," or that performance knocked me off my feet. That's what it means to be amazed. It means to literally be displaced from where I was because of what I heard or what I saw. It was so powerful that it knocked me off my feet. And 30 times in the Bible, that word amazed is used to describe people's reaction to Jesus. In fact, if there's anything that Jesus did on a consistent basis to other people, it was amaze them. People were constantly amazed at Jesus. If you take a book like Luke, which is a great historical account, first-hand account, that kind of goes in chronological order of the life of Jesus, and you start in the beginning when he was born and go all the way to the end after his resurrection, the first thing you notice is that Jesus amazed people with his teaching. I mean, he said some of the most amazing things. Here are just a few of them. In Mark 10:24, some of the examples of his teachings amazing people. The disciples were amazed at his words. Matthew 7:28, when Jesus had finished these words, the crowds were amazed at his teaching. Matthew 22, and hearing this, they were amazed, and leaving him, they went away. Mark 1, they were amazed at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one having authority and not as the scribes. In Luke 4, they were amazed at his teaching, for his message was with authority. Luke 20, they were unable to catch him in a saying, and being amazed at his answer, they became silent. Mark 1, they were all amazed so that they debated, what is this new teaching? The thing that amazed them about his teaching was this idea that he taught with authority. He taught with authority. He wasn't just repeating what other scribes had said. It wasn't as if he had read all of the books or heard all of the speakers and he was just quoting the other people. No, he had new stuff to present. He spoke new truth. And that's not what the teachers of the law did. The teachers of the law would read the law. They would quote other teachers. But in order to have authority, they would have to have a past historical foundation that they were standing on in order to say things that others had said. But that's not what Jesus did. Jesus claimed to be able to say new truth and to say, that's true because I say so. People were amazed that he would do that. And they weren't just new, but they were remarkable. In fact, they seemed contrary to intuition or common sense. They were counterintuitive. It'd be like if you showed up on the first day of class and your professor said to you, I want you to know that whoever fails this class, I will be rewarding with an A. You just go, what? Say, what? What did he say? Or at the beginning of the soccer match, the referee brought you to the middle and said, okay, at the end of 90 minutes, whichever team has the fewest goals will be awarded the victory. Have a great game. I mean, you take 2 steps and then stop and go, wait, that's not how it works. I mean, people literally were saying to each other, did I just hear Jesus right? Is that what he said? I mean, listen to some of the amazing things that Jesus said. He said things like, the people who are blessed by God are the least and the last and the lowly. Right? Blessed by God. I mean, the culture said that it's the people who are kind of like cursed by God. That's why they're last and least and lowly. I mean, they have nothing because clearly they did something wrong. And that's why God is punishing them and not rewarding them. But you're saying that they're blessed by God? That like God loves those people? That doesn't make any sense. Jesus said to die is to really live. He said to find your life, you have to lose it. He said to surrender to God is to become ultimately free. I mean, surrender, that's a bondage word. If you stick your hands up and surrender to the police, you become a prisoner. You don't become free. That doesn't make any sense, Jesus. What are you even talking about? And they would look at each other and say, I'm amazed that he would say such a thing. Jesus said things like, love your enemies. He actually had the audacity to look at the religious leaders and say, do you know that these prostitutes and tax collectors, they're closer to heaven than you are right now. To become a leader, you must become a servant. The first shall be last. And he even said, in order to receive salvation, you must believe in God. Wait, no. Salvation's all about doing, right? I mean, I earn salvation. It's a reward for what I've done. That's intuition. That's what people kind of commonly thought. That's why I'm living a good life. And Jesus said this amazing counterintuitive thing. No, it's by believing in me that you receive. It's by grace and not by works. People heard Jesus and they were just amazed at what he was saying. Because he said things that no one else had ever said before. But then secondly, Jesus amazed people with his miracles. I mean, just as people were trying to kind of wrap their head around what he was saying. Just as they woke up in the morning and said, we got to go hear him again. I mean, that can't, I must have heard that wrong. I mean, I was at the back, I was on the bottom of the mountain, and I don't think the sound traveled very well. Clearly that was wrong. It's like the scene in Monty Python, The Life of Brian. You know, yeah, you're laughing at it. You remember that scene where he's crying out and he says, they keep passing back and someone says, what did he say? He goes, blessed are the Greeks. The Greeks? Really? He said, no, not the Greeks, the meek. Blessed are the meek. The guy says, oh, good, they never get anything. It's like they couldn't hear it. No. They went out the second day and he said the same thing. But not only did he talk and say these amazing words, but then he had these amazing miracles. A miracle is simply when God intervenes or interferes with the normal laws of life. It's when the rules of science that we all believe to be true don't work the way they're supposed to work. And Jesus' miracles display that he had authority over all creation. He could kind of like break the rules whenever he wanted. I mean, his miracles showed that he had the authority to step into the world of chemistry and take water and its H2O chemical compound and just all of a sudden turn it into wine. Now, he could do that if he wanted to, because he had the authority over all of chemistry. He had the authority in the world of physics to simply walk on water. To know that, yes, there is a principle of buoyancy that says I should sink, but no, I'm going to create a miracle, and I'm going to violate that. Or he was going to take a certain number of loaves and fishes and then multiply it, even though there's clearly a law of physics that says matter can neither be created or destroyed. He just intervened and changed that. He had authority over meteorology. He just spoke, and the storm stopped blowing one day. He had authority over zoology. He commands fish to literally jump into a net so that Peter can catch them. Like everything biologically, evolutionary, fish don't go into nets. They're trying to avoid the nets, and there was no fish there, and then all of a sudden they all swim in. I mean, the laws of biology, the greatest law that life has an ending. He brings people back from death to life. He brings back a little girl who's on her deathbed. Simply speaks to her and she comes back to life. And then one day he's walking down the street and he sees a widow and she is in a funeral procession and there's a coffin and she finds out that the widow's son, the only person who would have been providing for the widow, he's died, he's in the coffin, and Jesus literally stops the procession, touches the coffin, and he comes back to life. And then he goes to a tomb where his friend Lazarus had died, and 4 days afterwards he calls out into the tomb and a dead man walks forward. I mean, I love that progression. Like, it's almost like Jesus is showing off with his miracles, you know? I mean, like, you brought a girl back to life. That's pretty cool. No one's done that. That's enough, you know? But Jesus, like, yeah, but she was just, like, kind of dead. I mean, she was on her deathbed still, right? You know, I had to find a guy who was dead, really dead, like, in the coffin, you know? I had to bring him back. But then people didn't believe me, so then I went for looking for someone who was, like, really, really dead. Like, 4 days dead, stinky dead. You know, they said, Jesus, you don't want to go in there. He stinks. He's been dead for 4 days. He's like, I got this. Brings him back to life. He violates all sorts of laws of modern medicine. He lets the deaf hear again, the blind can see, the lame can walk. He cures leprosy, an incurable disease. Even towards the end of his life, he interferes with the laws of ecology. He simply speaks to a fig tree, and on the spot, it withers up and dies. And then as if the natural laws of science aren't enough, he interferes with the laws of society, like sociology. In his own life, he goes out and speaks to a Samaritan woman, breaking 2 huge laws of the day, that men would never speak to women like that in a public setting, especially a teacher. And then secondly, a Jew would never go up and speak to a Samaritan. And his disciples were amazed when they saw Jesus speaking to this woman. People were amazed at Jesus because he did things that no one had ever done before. And you know, when someone shows up in our life today and starts asserting that much authority, I mean, when someone maybe is the new guy at the office or the new mom at the school, and all of a sudden they start kind of doing things like no one's ever done them before, saying things like no one's ever said, treating people the way no one's ever treated, your natural response is to kind of look to your friends and go, what's up with this guy? Like, what's the deal? He just got here yesterday. Who does he think he is? Who does this mom think she is cutting to the front of the line? Or who does this mom think she is speaking those sorts of things? What do you think, you're God or something? I mean, you walk in here, you act like you own the place. And these 12 disciples are off on the side like, I think he does. I think he actually owns this place. Like everything. I think that's what we're figuring out. He's acting like God because I think he's God. It's as if Jesus is trying to kind of bring people to this experience in their own learning. That they would see his miracles, they'd hear his words, they'd be amazed, and they'd be like, this guy is not like the rest of us. What is going on? Who is he? And they begin to ask those questions, and as you see in Luke, the book progresses from being amazed at his words to his works, to ultimately then Jesus amazed people with his identity. I mean, he claimed to be God. You see it consistently in the book of Luke. He received worship like no one else ever received worship except kings in the Old Testament. And the time that a king allowed people to bow down before him and worship him as God, he died that night. It was like, don't mess with God in that. Don't accept the worship of God unless you want God to hold you accountable. But when people bowed down and worshiped him as God, his disciples were all like, get up. And Jesus said, no, that's okay. They recognize who I am. The Pharisees ultimately arrested him for the crime of blasphemy, claiming to be God. They knew who he thought he was. And he demonstrated his own power over death itself, as only God can do. In Mark 16, it says, entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting at the right side, wearing a white robe, and they were amazed. And the angel said to them, do not be amazed. You are looking for Jesus, the Nazarene, who has been crucified. He has risen. He's not here. Behold, the place where they laid him. Jesus had the power that only God had to conquer death. But see, what confuses people often about the identity of Jesus, and what often trips up people even from other religions and causes them to doubt whether or not Jesus was God, is that you can't find a chapter and a verse where Jesus says, excuse me, I'm God. Like, he doesn't ever say that. It's not a quote. And so you naturally think, well, if he wanted everyone to know he was God, wouldn't he just kind of like always be telling people, I'm God, follow me, I'm God. That's who I am, I'm God. But you know, in that culture, and the same in this culture, if you had a high-ranking position of authority, it was kind of dishonoring to announce who you were. I mean, we just had a new king here, coronated, right? We just 700,000 people. That's a sweet party. That's the best street party I've ever been a part of this summer, when they had the Belgian National Day, and the king had his coronation, and he came out and spoke. But on that day, when the king became king, King Philip did not step up and say to everyone, I am the king. I mean, like, that'd be almost dishonorable. You see, he had a whole line of people that went before him, that prepared people. They got the parade route ready. And then they announced him as king. People blow the trumpet and you herald the king. In the U.S., when the president speaks at the State of the Union address, before he even walks into the room, the crier raps on the door and says, the President of the United States. You see, you get introduced if you're in a position of authority. You don't have to say it yourself. That would be dishonorable. It's the same thing as being at maybe a TED Talk or being at a situation, you might be in a luncheon or a concert, where before the main act comes on stage to speak, they get introduced. It's so that they don't have to tell everyone who they are. You honor them by preparing the way. And that's exactly what happens with Jesus. He never says, I am God, because he got introduced to the world as God. The angels showed up to his parents. The angels showed up to Anna and Simeon, the religious prophets of the day. The angels showed up to the shepherds, and to all of them said, God is coming, and his name will be Jesus. And then John the Baptist, on the day that Jesus begins his ministry, he actually introduces him to the world. He says, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. People were amazed at Jesus because he was unlike anyone who had ever lived before. What amazes me is that the people who are amazed at Jesus' words, and the same people who are amazed at his works, refuse to believe that he was who he said he was. I mean, even after his entire life had established the credibility that who he claimed to be was who he actually was, they couldn't accept that conclusion. And the same people who followed him every day were amazed at what he had said and amazed at what he had done. When they realized who he claimed to be, they wanted to kill him. Because the reality of their life and their human nature is the same reality of ours today, which is that it's pretty easy to be amazed at the authority of his words. And it's pretty easy at a distance to even be amazed at those miracles. But to be amazed at who Jesus actually is, then I have to recognize that he has authority in my life. It's not just the authority of his words and his works, but all of a sudden, if he is God in the flesh, and I am merely a human being created by him, then he has authority. And I think that was the whole point that Jesus was trying to make when he amazed people. He was trying to bring them to a point where they would be amazed, not just at what he said and what he did, but who he was, and that amazement would lead us and lead them to worship him. To worship, literally, it's a posture word. It means to bend or bow down. It's the idea of a king walking into the room, and immediately you would lower your head back below where their head is as a sign that you're above me in stature, in honor. To worship is simply to recognize that, God, you have authority over me. You have authority over my life. And Jesus wants to amaze us so that we'll simply worship him. And the most amazing thing to me is that Jesus Christ is not just God of history in the past, but that if he is resurrected from the tomb and is alive today, that he's still speaking to us. That his words can still amaze us. And he can still speak through the scripture, and he can speak personally to each one of us. And that his works in life can amaze us. I'm amazed that God can intervene in Wes and Anna's life back there. And in 13 days after introducing them to each other, they can get engaged. That's amazing. That's like Jesus' miracle. Some of you single people could be 13 days away from being engaged. Just think about that. That's amazing. I love their story because I love that if you ask them about it, it was God weaving their lives together. It was not their plan. God intervened. He interfered. He did a miracle in their life. He still does that in our lives. My family is in Brussels because God interfered in our life. He did a miracle and told us to go somewhere. And the only reason we were willing to obey him is because we believe that he's amazing and he's worthy of our worship. And so the simple question for us tonight as we finish this all well, as we start this year-long theme of just looking at the life of Jesus, is just to ask ourselves, are we amazed by Jesus? I mean, today, still, 2,000 years after his death and resurrection, am I amazed by Jesus? And will we allow our amazement at his life to lead us to a place where we worship him with our lives? That's the question for us today.